Hello, Namaskar. This is Firstpost and you're watching Vantage with me, Palki Sharma. It's a summit war to settle the fighting in Ukraine. President Donald Trump's team is heading to Saudi Arabia. They're all set to meet a Russian delegation. Meanwhile, European leaders are huddling in Paris. They have been blindsided by Trump's rapid moves. So what is America's plan to end this war? What role is Europe going to play? We are bringing you special reports on the dueling summits. Also on the show is the U.S. supporting Taiwan's independence. A State Department update has triggered confusion. In the Congo, the civil war is escalating. Armed groups have entered a major city in the east. In China, Xi Jinping met with top businessmen, including Jack Ma. We'll tell you what his message was. In India, the national capital is recovering from a deadly stampede over the weekend. We'll tell you how apathy and mismanagement led to it. Also, why Coca-Cola is now betting on milk. All this and more lined up. The headlines first.
Elon Musk's Department of Government Efficiency sparks alarm. They have reportedly sought access to a system with the U.S. Tax Office, which has detailed financial data of millions of Americans. Reports say the request has not been granted so far. Lebanon fears Israel may not fully withdraw its forces by the deadline agreed upon in the truce talks. Lebanese officials demand Israel's full withdrawal by Tuesday. Israeli forces missed an earlier January cutoff under a fragile ceasefire between Israel and the Iran-backed Hezbollah. Mauritius' former Prime Minister Pravin Jugnauth gets bail in a money laundering case. Police had detained the 63-year-old along with his wife on Saturday. He was held after his alleged accomplices were raided and suitcases full of cash were found in their homes. The former premier has denied any wrongdoing. India's capital New Delhi jolted this morning by powerful tremors from a 4.0 magnitude earthquake. The epicenter was on the edge of the city and there have been no reports of major damage. Northern India lies on a major geological fault line, making earthquakes here a regular occurrence. And India suspends its winter games due to a lack of snow in one of the world's highest ski resorts. The Himalayan resort of Gulmarg was due to hold national competitions from the 22nd to the 25th of February.
One war, two summits, many players. That is how Ukraine's future will be decided. We know that President Donald Trump would shake things up. We knew that he would, but perhaps not this much. He's pushing ahead with talks to end the war, and guess what? He's not even consulting Ukraine. Trump officials are heading to Saudi Arabia right now. The team includes Secretary of State Marco Rubio, National Security Advisor Mike Waltz, and Special Envoy Steve Witkoff. In Riyadh, they are expected to meet Russian officials. But why Riyadh? Well, Saudi Arabia is technically neutral. They're not allied with Russia or the United States. At the same time, they have great ties with both the countries. So the kingdom is suited to this role. Now we come to the talks. What are they hoping to achieve? The US says don't expect too much. They're seeing this as a preliminary discussion, sort of like a precursor to the real talks. President Donald Trump gave his assessment yesterday. He said Ukraine will be involved in the talks. He also said that Vladimir Putin wants to stop the fighting.
We're moving along. We're trying to get a peace with Russia, Ukraine, and we're working very hard on it. It's a war that should have never started.
Do you expect Zelensky to be involved in these conversations? What will his role be?
I do. He will be involved, yes.
Based on your conversations with President Putin, what do you think he wants ultimately in Ukraine?
I think he wants to stop fighting. I see that. They have a big, powerful machine. You understand that. And they defeated Hitler and they defeated Napoleon. You know, they've been fighting a long time. They've done it before. And but I think he'd like to. I think he would like to stop fighting.
And Russia agrees. They want to end the war with talks.
This is a powerful signal that now we will try to solve the problem through a dialogue, and now we will talk about peace, not war. After all, what was with the previous administration? No dialogue. The war till the end.
So there is agreement on both sides, in Washington and in Moscow. But is there agreement on Kiev? And that's where the problem starts. Trump said that Zelensky will be involved in the talks, but Ukraine has not been invited to Riyadh. The U.S. Secretary of State was asked about this. He said Ukraine will be invited eventually when there is something concrete to work on. Same with Europe. The war is being fought on their doorstep. They have poured billions into the war effort, yet there is no clarity on Europe's role. Marco Rubio said the Europeans would be involved, but Trump's special envoy said no. Listen to this.
Can you assure this audience that Ukrainians will be at the table and Europeans will be at the table?
The answer to that last question, just as you framed it, the answer is no. The answer to the earlier part of that question is yes. Of course the Ukrainians are going to be at the table. I mean, who would be foolish to say they wouldn't?
Well, here's the problem. Any peace deal will require security guarantees. Someone will have to promise to defend Ukraine in the future, maybe even deploy soldiers to their border. Trump is clear that America will not do that. He wants Europe to take the lead here. Yet he won't invite Europe to the peace talks. Do you see the problem here? A, the message is conflicting, and B, the plan is all over the place. I'll give you one example of this. Trump's special envoy for Ukraine is Keith Kellogg, the man you just heard speak. But he's not heading to Riyadh for the talks. It is Steve Witkoff. Now, Witkoff is a special envoy for the Gaza war. He's been striking deals in West Asia, and now he's striking deals for Ukraine, or hoping to. Let me repeat that. Trump's Gaza envoy is taking part in the Ukraine talks. Meanwhile, the Ukrainian envoy is not even at the table. It suggests a great deal of chaos. Nonetheless, let's try to figure out a pattern here. What are they trying to do? Two things are quite clear from President Trump's approach. Number one, he wants to deal directly with Russia. He doesn't want Ukraine or Europe anywhere near the talks. From his perspective, you can see why he wants that. Europe and Ukraine will not agree to any concessions. The chances of success are quite low. They could sink the peace plan quickly. And number two, he wants to move fast. We have mentioned the strategy before. It's called shock and awe. Make rapid moves before your enemies and allies can catch their breath. That's what Trump is doing right now. Just look at his timeline. Last Wednesday, he spoke to President Putin. On Friday, Vice President J.D. Vance met Zelensky. On Sunday night, Trump's team headed to Saudi Arabia. Tomorrow, they will meet the Russians. And by the end of this month, Trump could meet Vladimir Putin. That's the latest assessment. Do you see how fast things are moving? Even Ukraine and Europe have been caught off guard. It's certainly a new peace strategy, but not necessarily a good one. If Trump had simply cut off military aid, it would have been understandable. He had hinted at doing that on the campaign trail, so no one would have been surprised, perhaps not even Zelensky. But Trump is not doing that. He is negotiating Ukraine's future without Ukraine. And that is a recipe for disaster. So Trump is doing his own thing, which has left Europe confused and worried. Their leaders are scrambling for solutions. And they're huddling in Paris today. It's been called an emergency informal meeting. The agenda? To discuss Ukraine's future, to chart a European strategy for the war, probably 3 years too late. Nonetheless, they're doing it. Heads of state from across Europe are attending, so is UK Prime Minister Keir Starmer. Before leaving for Paris, he made a major announcement. Starmer said he's willing to send British soldiers to Ukraine, not to fight Russia, but to enforce the peace. Like I said, any deal will require security guarantees, and that responsibility will fall on Europe. Keir Starmer says he's up to it. He's also looking to play the role of a mediator. Between whom? Europe and the United States. Starmer is slated to visit the White House later this month. He's hoping to give Europe's message to Trump. Well, it sounds good on paper, but Starmer's own ties with Trump are weak. He has clashed repeatedly with Trump's allies like Elon Musk, so it's not clear how he will mediate. For now, let's focus on the Paris meeting. German Chancellor Olaf Scholz is attending, so is Polish Prime Minister Donald Tusk, NATO Chief Mark Rutte, Italian Prime Minister Giorgia Meloni, and EU Chief Ursula von der Leyen. So all the big European powers are attending. The question is, can they arrive at a common strategy? In the past, such efforts have failed, but this one is a bit different because it's happening after a tumultuous week. First, Donald Trump spoke to Russian President Putin. Europe was completely blindsided by this. And then US Vice President J.D. Vance attacked Europe, in Europe. This happened at the Munich Security Conference. Vance simply unloaded on Europe. He said their biggest threat was not China or Russia, but the retreat of free speech.
The threat that I worry the most about vis-a-vis Europe is not Russia, it's not China, it's not any other external actor. And what I worry about is the threat from within, the retreat of Europe from some of its most fundamental values, values shared with the United States of America. In Britain and across Europe, free speech, I fear, is in retreat.
Well, Europe is not used to this sort of attack, especially not from its most important ally. It seems to have set off alarm bells in Brussels. Hence the need for today's summit. Their first priority will be to decide on a plan for Ukraine. Do they boost military spending? Do they commit troops to, like Britain? Do they condemn talks behind their backs, or do they stick to diplomatic niceties? What should Europe do? That's what we need to watch out for. Officially, the position in Brussels is quite clear. A weaker Ukraine is bad news for Europe.
A failed Ukraine would weaken Europe, but it would also weaken the United States. It would intensify the challenges in the Indo-Pacific and threaten our shared interests. Because what we have seen is the authoritarians of this world are carefully watching whether there's any impunity if you invade your neighbor and violate international borders, or whether there are real deterrents.
Also, watch out for unity or the lack of it. Putin bet on that when he invaded Ukraine in 2022. Trump too is betting on that today. If major EU powers are united, they can mount a challenge. If not, there is little hope for them. But don't mistake this meeting for some selfless act towards Kiev, because it's also about self-preservation. Europe needs America's military protection. Until now, that was guaranteed, but President Donald Trump is ripping up the old playbook. He wants Europe to defend itself. Expect the leaders to address this concern too. And they mainly have two options now. One is to increase their military spending to convince Trump that Europe agrees with his philosophy, the philosophy of pitching in. The second is to go it alone. Zelensky pitched that idea over the weekend. He said Europe should have its own army. It's an idea that was previously supported by French President Macron. The French are clearly leading the way here. They're calling for creative solutions.
I'm not just talking about the threat posed by Russia today. I'm talking about all the threats that could threaten Europe if the authoritarian powers here or there feel that Europe is helpless, that it is unable to defend itself. So we're going to have to make far greater creative efforts than we have to date. And we need to be prepared for this, because we will have to face difficult days, make complicated decisions, and perhaps even sacrifices that we did not expect until now if, indeed, this security is to be guaranteed.
Europe will also be watching the moves in Riyadh. They will be on the lookout for concessions from Trump. For example, what if he pulls back NATO deployments from Eastern Europe? What if he vows to end NATO expansionism? It wouldn't just impact Ukraine, it would impact Europe's security too. So this is a very important meeting for the EU, one that could shape their future and security. Let's see what the leaders can come up with. The Ukraine war began in 2022. Since then, Kiev has had many tough weeks, but none as bad as the last one. For 3 years, the US has backed Ukraine in this war, but Donald Trump came and changed that. So now Kiev is left on its own. Its NATO membership bid is up in the air. The US wants its mineral reserves. It may have to concede land to Russia, and a peace deal is being negotiated, but not on its own terms. What will all of this mean for Ukraine? What is President Zelensky's next step? What will Kiev have to lose to end this war? Our next report tells you.
For nearly 3 years, Ukraine has waged a war of survival. It has endured battlefield losses. It has had victories, international summits, shifting alliances, and the tragic weight of lost lives. But the past week has been the most punishing in Ukraine's struggle. A week in which the fragile scaffold of Western support began to tremble, all under the weight of American indifference. The shock came from Washington, where President Trump all but dismantled the rhetorical edifice of unwavering US support. No NATO membership, no security guarantees.
Do you oppose NATO membership for Ukraine?
I don't think it's practical to have it, personally.
If the war were to end, he says he wants guarantees of security.
We'll see what that means.
And no obligation to restore Ukraine's territorial integrity. In the face of America's retreat, someone needed to fill the gap. The obvious choice was Europe. The European Union has been steadfast in its support for Ukraine, but it lacks the military capability to replace US security guarantees.
It will provoke a world war. There is nothing else I can say about these negotiations. We are at war, so it's okay, but poor Europe. I think this is another step towards a world war. Trump is trying to pacify the aggressor.
I believe there should be justice for Ukraine, because I consider the ceasefire to be our defeat. We have been destroyed for so long. How many heroes died? What is the reconciliation? The world has to intervene.
So Western support is not an ironclad promise, but a shifting tide. So where does that leave Ukraine and its president Volodymyr Zelensky? Trump's move has left Kyiv with a bleak choice. If it chooses to resist negotiations, it risks an attritional military defeat. If it engages, it will likely be forced to accept conditions dictated by Moscow, particularly regarding the occupied territories in the east. Meanwhile, Russia is stepping up attacks on Ukrainian forces. The main attacks were concentrated around Pokrovsk, which is a logistics hub. Kyiv's military reported 261 combat engagements with Russia on Saturday, the largest number recorded this year. Meanwhile, overnight Russian strikes hit a Ukraine power plant, leaving residents in southern Mykolaiv freezing in the cold. And as if war and diplomacy were not enough, Zelensky now faces mounting domestic pressure. His approval ratings have slipped. His move to sanction former President Petro Poroshenko is being slammed. Trump and his allies have begun pressing for Ukrainian elections. They argue Zelensky's mandate has long expired. Things are looking grim for the Ukrainian president, who wants security guarantees and growing support from Europe.
This is about making Europe's contribution to our partnership equal to America's. And we need the same approach when it comes to diplomacy, working together for peace. Ukraine will never accept deals made behind our backs without our involvement. This war cannot be decided by just a few leaders, not by Trump and Putin, not by me and Putin, not by anyone here in Munich sitting down with Putin alone. We must apply pressure together to make real peace.
Zelensky can make demands, but right now, Ukraine is facing a grim paradox. It has too much to lose and too little to bargain with. A failed peace deal could be worse than no deal at all. What Ukraine needs most is time. Time to stabilize its front, time to rebuild its forces, and time to navigate the diplomatic minefield ahead. But time is precisely what it lacks.
So America is trying to end the Ukraine war, but it seems to be stirring new tensions in the East. The Trump administration has made a bold move on Taiwan. It has signaled support for an independent Taiwan. The U.S. State Department has updated its website. It has published a new fact sheet on Taiwan. Now, first things first, what is a fact sheet? Think of it as a background note, a document that provides an overview of a country from the American perspective. And this story is about the American fact sheet on Taiwan. The earlier versions of it had a phrase, "We do not support Taiwan independence." That's what it said. The U.S. State Department fact sheet, "We do not support Taiwan independence." But now this specific line has been removed, and that is quite significant. Remember, the U.S. policy on Taiwan has always been ambiguous. Their law says America must defend Taiwan if China attacks the island. But Washington has never made it clear whether and how this will be implemented, whether they would send American troops to defend Taiwan or use other means like diplomatic or economic means. Like I said, it is ambiguous. Officially, the US supports the One China policy, which is also China's official line and excuse to target Taiwan. The One China policy views Taiwan as part of China. It basically says there is only one China and Taiwan is a part of it. That is the policy. And the new State Department fact sheet still mentions one China. But it also talks about Taiwan's independence and defense. The US also sells arms to Taiwan. And now the Trump administration is stepping up support. It is shifting the US position on some fronts, showing more support to Taiwan and ending some of the ambiguity. The US is expanding military cooperation. It has added a new reference to the State Department fact sheet. It talks about what it calls a Pentagon project. The Pentagon, as you would know, is the US Defense Ministry. It is working on a semiconductor development project. And Taiwan is supporting this initiative. And that's what the fact sheet says, that Taiwan is cooperating with the United States on this. Washington is also expanding diplomatic support. It wants to support Taipei's membership to international organizations. That's something that China is strongly opposed to. Remember, this had become a big issue during the early days of the pandemic. In 2020, there were calls for Taiwan to be included in the WHO, the World Health Organization. Taiwan was among the first to sound an alarm about the outbreak in Wuhan, but Beijing blocked Taiwan's participation. It doesn't want Taiwan to have an independent seat at international forums. Now, America has set the stage for a showdown. It has pledged diplomatic support. It wants to help Taipei get a seat at the diplomatic high table. The US hasn't spelled out the specifics, but Taipei has welcomed these broader shifts in American policy. Of course, China won't like any of it. Xi Jinping sees Taiwan as a quote-unquote inseparable part of China. He calls the island a breakaway province, one that will eventually be reunited with the mainland. So expect a strong pushback from Beijing.
The revision of the fact sheet on U.S. Taiwan relations by the U.S. State Department, which seriously regressed its position on Taiwan-related issues, seriously violated the One China principle and the 3 Sino-U.S. joint communiques, seriously violated international law and basic norms of international relations, and sent a serious wrong signal to the Taiwan independence separatist forces. This is another example of the U.S. side's stubborn adherence to the wrong policy of using Taiwan to contain China.
At a time when tensions are growing in the Taiwan Strait, American and Canadian ships have been spotted near the island. Last week, the U.S. Navy sailed through the strait. Yesterday, a Canadian warship took the same route. China was quick to condemn Canada. It also dispatched 24 aircraft. They conducted patrols around Taiwan. This kind of military adventurism from the PLA has become routine. Chinese warships and aircraft are spotted near Taiwan almost every day, and now Donald Trump has made new moves, which are sure to invite Chinese reactions, most likely in the form of more military pressure on Taipei. And while strong diplomatic backing for Taiwan is important, it must be matched with greater military preparedness and deterrence on the ground. We do hope that Taipei is ready for the challenge ahead. And what about China? Is the military pressure on Taipei just for show, or is Beijing truly prepared to wage war over Taiwan? Xi Jinping has set a deadline for the PLA, that's the People's Liberation Army, the Chinese army. He wants them to be war ready by 2027. He has repeated this goal several times, but the US has its doubts. A new report is raising questions. It comes from the Washington-based RAND Corporation. This report claims that the PLA is not war ready and that China's military modernization has a different purpose. The report says the modernization is not aimed at winning wars overseas, but the PLA's focus instead is on protecting the Communist Party. Our next report brings you the details.
China's recent military build-up has stunned the world. The rapid modernization of the PLA, the creation of the world's largest naval fleet, the growing stockpile of nuclear weapons, and the expansion of military bases overseas. Rivals like the United States see this build-up as a direct challenge and a potential military threat. But some researchers in the United States hold a different view. They believe the PLA's modernization drive is to bolster the Communist Party and to uphold the party's rule at home, not to fight foreign enemies. The researchers present some compelling arguments to support this theory. They point to Beijing's emphasis on political education. The report says the PLA spends 40% of its training time on political topics instead of training for combat operations. They also highlight the role of political commissars in the PLA. They are appointed alongside the military commanders. Their job is to ensure loyalty to the Communist Party within the PLA. They oversee political education and influence key decisions. The commissars hold the same rank as commanders. That shows just how powerful they are. This dual power center could be a potential weakness for the PLA. In most militaries, troops solely answer to their commanders. But in China, they are equally accountable to the Communist Party and its loyalists within the PLA. This is not by accident, but by design. Beijing has long prioritized party loyalty within the military. This dates back to the Mao era. Mao Zedong, the founder of modern-day China, insisted on absolute loyalty to the party. The party commands the gun, he had once declared. This principle became the foundation of the PLA's relationship with the party. Under Xi Jinping, loyalty to the party has become even more critical. As president, he has reshaped the PLA. He has placed himself at the top of the chain of command and centralized the PLA's entire command and control structure. On repeated occasions, he has demanded loyalty from the PLA. Last year, he had met the Chinese forces. Xi Jinping told his commanders the party's leadership over the military is absolute, and he wants troops who are loyal, clean, and responsible. His sweeping purge of China's military leadership is aimed at enforcing this loyalty. Since taking over as president, Xi Jinping has removed tens of thousands, if not millions, of soldiers and commanders from the PLA. Most of them were accused of being corrupt. Others had their loyalties questioned. So it's abundantly clear that in the PLA, loyalty matters more than combat skills.
Let's turn our attention to the Democratic Republic of Congo. This is a country in Central Africa and it has been dogged by conflict for more than 3 decades now. Numerous armed groups have fought over its eastern region, which is rich in minerals, and now this fight is escalating. The M23 group is making advances. They have entered Bukavu. Bukavu is a city of more than 1 million people in eastern DRC. This comes 2 weeks after another city in the region came under the control of the rebels. What does this instability mean for the country? Our next report tells you.
This is Bukavu, the second largest city in the mineral-rich eastern region of the Democratic Republic of Congo. It borders Rwanda, and lies on the southern tip of Lake Kivu, which is an important transit point for the local mineral trade. Over the weekend, rebels from the M23 group entered Bukavu.
What does it mean to be a Rwandan? They are deceiving you to distract you. What I ask of you is to tell the army and the pro-government militia fighters hiding in houses to surrender. Understood? Because we know they are hiding in homes. We know they talk more than they fight. They have lost the war.
This came hours after M23 rebels seized the airport some 30 kilometers north. As they advanced towards the center of Bukavu, which is home to more than 1 million people, gunfire rang out. Shops and businesses closed down, and hundreds of thousands of people fled from their homes.
We want the authorities who are now in the city to help us with our security. Here in Bukavu, we have a serious problem with these young children who have already taken up arms. They're shooting in the neighborhoods, preventing people from going to work.
DRC has been in the grips of conflict for about 3 decades now, and M23, the ethnic Tutsi-led insurgent group, backed by Rwanda, has operated in its mineral-rich eastern region. They claim their goal is to eradicate fighters linked to the 1994 Rwandan genocide. But humanitarian organizations say this is simply a means for Rwanda to extract and export valuable minerals from the region. The Congolese government has accused Rwanda of sowing chaos in the region and exploiting the country. But Rwanda has denied such claims. The fighting is raging in the eastern region. The recent surge has worsened an already dire humanitarian situation. Last month, M23 seized Goma, which is the main city in DRC's east. The fighting has destroyed 70,000 emergency shelters in and around the city, leaving 350,000 people displaced. But taking Bukavu represents a new phase of turbulence for the region, and it is not a good look for DRC's President Felix Tshisekedi. The rebel group's rapid advancements weaken his legitimacy and are yet another blow to his government. What makes it even worse is that Tshisekedi was in Germany for a conference when chaos erupted back home. Despite international calls for peace, the conflict has drawn armies from in and around Africa, like Uganda, Angola, Burundi, as well as Belgium. According to reports, Bulgarian, Romanian, Belarusian, Georgian, Algerian, and French mercenaries have been involved in the conflict. So the latest advance by M23 rebels increases the risk of a greater regional war. The continent's heads of state echoed this worry as they met at the African Union Summit in Ethiopia this weekend.
We are all very, very concerned about an open regional war in over Eastern DRC. This new escalation should not become an open conflict that will disrupt and impact on humanitarian activities and the already very weakened social fabric in the region. The only way to solve the problem in Eastern DRC is for all parties to sit around the table.
That may be true, but looking at the current scenario, there may be higher chances of the brutal fighting in DRC spiraling into a wider war than there are of getting all the parties to agree to a ceasefire.
It looked like just another event in China. Xi Jinping walking into a grand hall, applause filling the room, the president taking his seat at the head of the table, others listening intently. Another routine conference, at least on the surface. But this was no ordinary gathering. It was a high-stakes meeting. On one side was President Xi Jinping. On the other were China's most powerful tech titans. Jack Ma, the founder of Alibaba. Wang Changfu, CEO of carmaker BYD. Ren Zhengfei, founder of Huawei. Lei Jun, CEO of Xiaomi, and many others were in attendance. Now, we don't have the specifics of what transpired here, but we do know that Xi Jinping spoke, and we know that the tech giants also had their say. It was all behind closed doors, though. Classic China. What stands out is the timing of this event. Just weeks ago, DeepSeek took the world by storm. Its AI model is the talk of the town. It's a serious contender to Western models. It is challenging Western models. And now Xi Jinping is meeting China's tech elite. Is this a show of support for the private sector? Is Xi Jinping finally backing them? We ask because they've had a love-hate relationship. China and its private tech sector is a relationship riddled with tension. With anti-monopoly crackdowns on Tencent and Alibaba, Jack Ma's mysterious disappearance a few years back, strict data security laws, and a relentless push for what they call common prosperity. And the result was this: innovation stifled, investment shaken, entrepreneurs wary, high-profile investors hesitant. In fact, the last time Xi Jinping met with them was back in 2018. Since then, it had been a long silence. So why is he engaging now? Because China's economy is struggling, the real estate sector is in crisis, growth is sluggish, geopolitical tensions are mounting, and trade tariffs, thanks to the new U.S. President Donald Trump, are not helping. Beijing needs a boost, and it is extending an olive branch to the private sector. At the heart of this renewed interest lies a clear strategic necessity: artificial intelligence. DeepSeek has already set the stage. There were trade restrictions, lack of cutting-edge AI chips, yet this AI model, the one that they created, is on par with their Western counterparts. And that's fueling a $1.3 trillion stock rally in China. In recent years, hedge funds had fled the country. Now they're returning, pouring more and more money into Chinese equities. Investors are optimistic. There is hope for more economic stimulus. So things seem to be looking up. And that's exactly the kind of success that Beijing wants to supercharge. Private innovation harnessed for national goals. A delicate balance between state control and free enterprise. A balance that Xi Jinping is determined to strike. The question is, will it work? Yes, China wants more private tech innovation, but it's not ready or willing to end state intervention. What Beijing wants is this: for the private sector to thrive within clear political boundaries. So as the dust settles from this meeting, the world will watch closely for tangible follow-ups. Will there be meaningful policy shifts? Will regulatory scrutiny ease? Or will the party's control remain the defining factor in China's story? DeepSeek's rise may symbolize the resilience of China's tech sector, but can it be a turning point for the private sector? That is something that remains to be seen. This meeting shows the limits of Chinese state power and their acknowledgement of those limits, an admission of sorts that Beijing cannot afford to alienate its entrepreneurs entirely. Let's turn to India now. It was a weekend of shock and grief in Delhi. 18 people were killed in a stampede at the New Delhi railway station. This incident happened on Saturday night. Hundreds of passengers had gathered to board trains to Prayagraj for the Mahakumbh. What happened next was a story of failures. Trains got delayed, law enforcement was weak, too many tickets were sold, and ultimately it ended in tragedy. Eyewitnesses are now recounting what happened. It is indeed a case of mismanagement and apathy. Our next report has more.
February 15th, Saturday. It was a night of tragedy at the New Delhi railway station. Clothes and footwear strewn around. Dazed survivors desperately looking for their missing family. And in the distance, the sound of sirens. This was the aftermath of Saturday's stampede. An avoidable tragedy that killed at least 18 people. The Railways has set up a team to investigate what happened, but the reasons seem clear. trains were already running late on Saturday, so the platforms were packed with waiting passengers. On top of this, there was a ticket frenzy. On normal days, around 7,000 tickets are sold between 6 p.m. and 8 p.m. But on Saturday, 9,600 general tickets were sold. That's 2,600 extra tickets, a classic sign of an impending rush. Adding to this was the confusion. On platform 14, passengers were awaiting the Prayagraj Express, a train slated for arrival at 10:10 p.m. Amid this wait came a confusing announcement: the arrival of another train to Prayagraj, that too on a different platform, number 12. You can imagine what happened next. Passengers mistook this train for the Prayagraj Express. They rushed to the footbridge to cross over to the next platform. And that's when the stampede happened.
भीड़ हो गई थी बहुत ज़्यादा प्रयागराज कुंभ की। गाड़ियाँ बहुत थी वैसे यहाँ पे, लेकिन पब्लिक इतनी ज़्यादा हो गई थी ना कि पब्लिक जो है बेकाबू हो गई एकदम, और वो जो है संभाल नहीं पाया कोई भी उसे।
14 नंबर प्लेटफार्म पर उतर रहे थे उस टाइम, काफ़ी भगदड़ टाइप की मतलब मची, भीड़ ऊपर से नीचे, और नियंत्रित लोड नहीं रहा होगा और ऐसा हो गया बस। बहुत मेरी पत्नी वहीं पे।
Was no one around to regulate the crowd. In total, some 80 security officers were deployed, but the station has 16 platforms. That's 5 personnel per platform, clearly not enough to prevent stampedes. The Railways has since announced compensation for the casualties. 10 lakh rupees for the kin of the deceased and 2.5 lakh for serious injuries. The Prime Minister also reacted to the stampede, calling it distressing. 2 days later, some passengers are still looking for their relatives. Meanwhile, the railway station remains packed. These were the scenes on Sunday. The same overcrowded platforms, the same rush to board trains, but the authorities are more vigilant. The sale of platform tickets has been stopped from 4 p.m. to 11 p.m. 8 companies of the paramilitary have been called in. Plus, all special trains to Prayagraj will run from a single platform. The authorities are clearly not taking any chances. But one question will haunt them. Could the stampede have been avoided? And were there enough signals to warn them? It seems the answer to both is yes.
This story, as I'm sure you can tell, is about a soda giant, Coca-Cola, the world's biggest beverage maker. But in the past few years, it has received one blow after another thanks to a growing body of research that proves the negative health effects of soda, including high risk of obesity and heart disease. There has been global action to curtail consumption of sugary drinks. Although progress is painfully slow, consumers are increasingly ditching soda. So now Coca-Cola is diversifying. It is ditching carbonation and moving towards cow milk. What does this mean for the company and for soda giants everywhere else? Here's a report.
Coca-Cola is the world's biggest beverage maker thanks to its soft drinks. It is a household name, but over the past few years it has moved away from carbonation and towards cow milk. This is Fairlife. Some of you may have heard of this brand. It launched in 2012 as a joint venture between Coca-Cola and dairy wholesaler Select Milk Producers. In 2020, Coca-Cola fully acquired the company for an initial $980 million. And now, the soda giant is looking at the total payment for the acquisition to be more than $6 billion. That's the hefty sum. This is one of Coca-Cola's priciest acquisitions ever. So what's behind the company's $7 billion bet? Why is it diversifying into the dairy market? It is mainly thanks to a more health-conscious consumer base. Study after study shows that sugary drinks like soda are bad for people's health. They increase the risk of obesity, diabetes, cardiovascular conditions, kidney and liver disease, among other problems. Now, consumers are increasingly making healthier choices, and there is a global policy push to curb the consumption of sodas, including higher taxes on sugary drinks. Plus, there is a push for wellness. It is a $1.8 trillion global market, and it includes everything from cold plunges to celery juice. So companies essentially manufacturing sugary drinks are moving towards other avenues like coffee, tea, or milk and giving it a wellness twist. Coca-Cola has raked in big profits with its milky move and sprinked it with wellness because Fairlife draws out lactose and sugar from the milk but doubles the protein. Protein shakes are a $6 billion market, and Coca-Cola is pushing into it. So despite being about 3 times the price of traditional milk in 2022, Fairlife sales surpassed $1 billion. That's 1,000% increase from $90 million in 2015. And now, it is Coca-Cola's fastest growing U.S. brand. But this is not an isolated case. Brands like Pepsi and Dr. Pepper also trying to diversify beyond the sugary drink market. They are pushing into all things water, from regular water to coconut water or the viral black cherry sparkling water. After all, global flavored water market stands at $14 billion. It promises rewards to those who choose to venture in. So whether it is milk or antioxidant-infused water, one thing is clear: soda behemoths are going beyond the bubbles. Only time will tell if their big bet helps them grow past soft drinks.
Our last story tonight is about America's biggest bank, JPMorgan Chase, or specifically their boss, who has gone viral. I'm talking about Jamie Dimon. He's the CEO of JPMorgan, and recently an audio clip from one of his meetings leaked, where Dimon had an expletive-laden outburst. He unleashed on the work-from-home culture and then fired a shot at Gen Z workers. Before we tell you what happened, here is some context. JPMorgan employs about 317,000 people the world over. They've had a hybrid work policy since the pandemic ended. It allowed most employees to work from home for 2 days a week. But last month, the company circulated a memo overhauling the policy, asking staff to return to office 5 days a week, and that's when the backlash started. Employees began complaining on work chats, on the internal message boards, and one group of workers even launched an online petition urging Dimon to soften the new policy. Finally, they've received an answer. Listen to what the top boss said during a meeting.
I don't care how many people sign that petition.
This is part of the leaked rant where Dimon railed against the work-from-home policy. He complained of slow decision-making, phone calls going unanswered, and managers failing to keep things under control.
A lot of you were on the Zoom, and you were doing the following, okay? You know, looking at your mail, sending texts to each other about what an asshole the other person is. Okay, not paying attention, not reading your stuff, you know, and if you don't think that slows down efficiency, creativity, creates rudeness and stuff, it does.
And that's not all. Dimon also talked about young workers getting left behind. The Gen Z or Zoomers, he claimed that they are being quote-unquote damaged from not getting trained at work because they don't want to show up at work when the CEO himself has been working from office.
And I've had it with this kind of stuff. And, you know, I come in, you know, I've been working 7 days a goddamn week since COVID. And I come in and where's everybody else? But they're here and there, and the Zooms don't show up. And people say they didn't get stuff. So that's not how you run a great company. We didn't build this great company by doing that.
After the outrage monologue, the JPMorgan boss indirectly threw the Q word in his swear word salad. He said that if employees don't want to come to office, they should just quit.
Now, you have a choice. You don't have to work at JPMorgan. So the people of you who don't want to work at the company, that's fine with me. I'm not mad at you. Don't be mad at me. It's a free country. You can walk with your feet.
Now, where have you heard this before? You see, when the pandemic shut down the world, employees were suddenly able to work from home, and now a new shift is underway. Companies are increasingly echoing Dimon's stance. Most of them believe that return to office is profitable. 81% think it increases revenue, and 83% companies say it increases productivity. So top bosses are calling workers back to office. 2025 is heralding this push. Name any top firm, your Apple, BlackRock, Citigroup, Dell, Google, Meta, Starbucks, they all want workers back in office this year onwards, even those who previously praised remote work. They've all backpedaled. Others are tracking attendance and firing employees who don't comply. So obviously workers are not excited because they are now used to the flexibility of hybrid work. It saves them time and effort. I'll give you an example. An average Indian spends about an hour to commute one way to work. 1 hour a day. Who wouldn't want to use this time better? Plus, there is a huge debate on whether productivity is actually boosted by being physically present at work. Let's take JPMorgan's example again. Last year, their profits surged to a record. Over the past 5 years, their share price has roughly doubled. This is despite their staff working from home, but their boss does not buy it.
And don't give me the shit that work from home Friday works. I call a lot of people on Friday. There's not a goddamn person you get a hold of.
This underlines tensions between CEOs and their underlings. Workers question why they need to spend more time in office while their bosses remain undeterred. Both the parties are trying to force each other's hand as the future of work reaches a stalemate, and this is not an optimistic outlook. Companies have to find a way that works for them and their employees. Instead of using the stick and carrot approach, it is time they figured out a model that strikes a balance. Delhi was jolted awake this morning, and I mean quite literally. A magnitude 4 earthquake struck the city today. Thankfully, there was no damage and people carried on with their normal routines. Now, tremors are quite common in the national capital. Every time it happens, people rush to Twitter, or X as it's called now. It's become a bit of a ritual. One that was repeated this morning. Delhiites did not just share their quake experience on social media, they also made memes on it. Take a look. And now it's time for Vantage Shots, images that tell the story. A Montreal crowd boos the U.S. anthem before an ice hockey game against Canada. North Korea's Kim Jong-un makes a rare visit to his father's tomb in Pyongyang, and Venice comes alive as the city celebrates its annual carnival. Finally, we are taking you back in history. On this day in 1979, China invaded Vietnam. It was in response to Vietnam's invasion of Cambodia. After a month of fighting, China withdrew, claiming victory. Both sides suffered heavy casualties. Despite the withdrawal, border skirmishes continued for years. We're leaving you on that note. Thank you for watching. We'll see you tomorrow. We're calling the show Vantage. We hope you like what we've put together for you. Touted as the minimum defense from that video. India's neighbors were the first to send the special edition of Vantage live from the White House throughout the week. Hindu Mandir we're on our way to Tel Aviv. Pretty measure, but it's also the perfect way to drive.
I don't think that
Prime Minister of Bhutan, Sherin Tagwe. Welcome to
60% of the world's
office. Prime Minister Modi did the iron. We were actually. What are you doing? How do you like? It's been 1 year since that meeting. Iron bars separate you from the outside. Out the vote effort. Trump had, it says, and at $4.3 trillion. 4.3 300 billion by 2030. That's what we need to tackle climate change.